Hello, everyone. This is Barry Jones of Standards Plus History Academy. And excuse me. Today we're going to be looking at uh, in a continuation of my JFK series. I want to add another topic, another question. And if you are familiar with my JFK series, you know that I always begin with a question, and that becomes sort of the driving force behind the entire PowerPoint is answering that question. And so the question today is the Warren Commission teaches that Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK and then in a rush to escape killed a Dallas police officer, Officer Tippit, in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas. And then, of course, 2 days after he did it, he was himself killed. There was no trial, case closed. 64 Warren Commission puts their stamp of approval on it. That's pretty much how it's been taught. And I want to introduce to you, audience, the story of Roscoe White today, and use a couple sources I believe are very credible sources. And some of the work is groundbreaking, and it's new. You're talking about this book here by Ricky. It's a story told by Ricky White, which is Roscoe White's son. And the authors are J. Gary Shaw and Brian K. Edwards. You can look them up on YouTube. They do some presentations on this book. It's a fantastic book. A lot of documents included, a lot of evidence that I have not seen before. That's why I wanted to do this presentation. Another source, and this guy I don't believe is with us anymore. I failed to look that up, but his name is Gary Cartwright. He wrote a story in 1990, essentially laying out the premise of what we're going to be discussing all the way back in 1990. Hardly anybody believed it then. A lot of evidence has emerged subsequent, which corroborates the story. He wrote the story in an issue of Texas Monthly. You can see the cover there. And the title of the article was "I Was Mandarin." And the third source is not directly related to Roscoe White, at least you wouldn't think. There doesn't seem to be a direct connection, but this again goes to a book I recently finished, A Woman I Know. This was published just last year by Mary Haverstick. Of course, this is mostly about the ZR rifle program, the domestic assassination program by the CIA to take out a domestic threat. So two of these books are about as contemporary as you can get, these sources. A Woman I Know in 2023, Admitted Assassin in 2024, and then Gary Carpenter in 1990. So let's talk about this guy, Roscoe White, and I'm going to size down my image here so I can move around, get him out of the way. All right. I'm just going to kind of give you the story, the backstory first, then the story, and then we'll fill in some details. Obviously, these two men pictured here are key in this whole discussion. On the left, as you're staring at the screen, that is Roscoe White and his U.S. Marine Corps outfit. And on the right is Lee Harvey Oswald. And I want to start off by showing all of the connections that these two men have. Now, this was discovered after Roscoe White's death. Of course, Lee Harvey Oswald died in 1963. Roscoe died in 1971, 8 years later. In 1982, Roscoe's son Ricky discovered or rediscovered his father's Marine Corps footlocker. And so 11 years had passed since his father's death, and he finds this footlocker, and there's some pretty incredible things in this footlocker. But here's what we already know. Okay, this wasn't discovered in the footlocker. This is a matter of public record. Roscoe White was in the United States Marine Corps from 57 to 61. This is the same time Lee Harvey Oswald was in the Marine Corps, 56 to 59. So they were in the Marine Corps together. But that in and of itself proves nothing. Okay, lots of people serve in the Marine Corps. However, Roscoe White was in the exact same military division the 1st Marine Air Wing as Lee Harvey Oswald during this time that they served in the Marine Corps together. It gets better. Roscoe White traveled to the Far East in 1957 on the same ship as Lee Harvey Oswald, and they were both stationed at Atsugi in Japan at the same time. And they both worked on the same U-2 project together during the time that they were stationed at Atsugi. So it's pretty clear that there is a connection that begins between these two individuals starting all the way back in 1957. Oswald was in the Marines in 56. Roscoe joined in 57. So at least at that time, of course, we already, if you've seen any of my previous episodes on Lee Harvey Oswald, it is an established fact. It's not an opinion, okay? It's an established fact that he was in the CIA and he worked for the FBI. This guy is about as connected as they come. He was an FBI informant up to the day he died, and he was an asset in the CIA. So that being the case, we're going to find out some interesting things about Roscoe White that indicate he also was in the CIA and he also was an informer for the FBI. So we'll stipulate right from the beginning that these guys have a lot in common, a lot in common. The main evidence that we're going to be looking at today was discovered in this footlocker in 82. And one of the first things that Ricky White noticed was all these photographs. Now, Roscoe White had been assigned to the Identification Bureau of the DPD. He'd gotten the job in October, which in and of itself is interesting. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. So he got this job, and he's assigned on the day of the assassination to the Identification Bureau, which gives him access to all the evidence, all the pictorial or photographic evidence from the original negatives he has access to. And so he has a background from his days working at the U-2, for the U-2 program in Atsugi. He has a background in photography, so the Dallas police, he's only been employed by the Dallas police about 6 weeks at this point, decide to put him in his area of expertise, and that is photography. So in this footlocker that Ricky White discovers, the first photograph he finds is a photograph of Jack Ruby and Ricky's mom, Geneva White, which is Roscoe's wife. They're posing together at the Carousel Club. Geneva had gone to work for Ruby as a cigarette girl / hostess in September of 63, so just 2 months before the assassination. And of course, Ricky remembered Ruby coming over for dinner on several occasions, and so this wasn't necessarily a surprise to find a photograph of Ruby and Geneva White, because the family, the White family and Jack Ruby were friends. But this is a photograph that sort of confirms that. The second photo that he found was a photo of Oswald, very famously, the backyard photo. What he discovered later was that was the only photograph made from the original negative. All the pictures that we've seen subsequent to the years were not made from the original negative. The original negative disappeared, meaning all of the backyard photos that we've seen were not made from the original negative. They were copies of a copy, basically. It's interesting to me, the longer I study the JFK assassination, the more I find that evidence that is exculpatory to Lee Harvey Oswald always seems to disappear. Just off the top of my head, Oswald, when shown this backyard photo, immediately identified it as a forgery. And the Canadian firm that later, for the House Select Committee, examined the photo also identified it as a forgery. If there had been a trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, this evidence, quote, that was used to convict Oswald in the eyes of the American people as far as PR is concerned, probably would have been established as a forgery if experts had taken a look at it. But of course, the negatives conveniently disappeared, and the only thing we have left are copies, but not the photograph in Roscoe White's footlocker. It was from the original negative, which means it was the original. And you think about other evidence that disappeared. How about just at the Tippit scene? You know, the wallet they said they found with Lee Harvey Oswald's ID and his alias's ID, Alec Heidel. That became inconvenient when Minutes later, they arrest somebody with a wallet identified as Lee Harvey Oswald with an alias of Alec Heidel, who has 2 wallets. So conveniently, the one at the Tippit scene disappeared. The shell casings that all the witnesses said didn't exist and suddenly did exist, and the Warren Commission, when they put them in their exhibit, did not have the initials of the officer who said he found them, and they were different. So obviously they disappeared. Evidence that was exculpatory, like the paraffin test, which showed that Oswald had not shot a rifle that day, that disappeared. I could go on and on and on. Or evidence that wasn't there that all of a sudden appeared, got manufactured out of thin air. This is another one of those. It reminds me of that because of this backyard photo they found in Roscoe White's footlocker. It's the only photo ever made from the original negatives. So wonder what happened to the original negatives. Anyway, the next photograph he found was of Roscoe White in his DPD uniform, which you see here displayed. And then there was a photo of J.D. Tippit in civilian clothes. Interesting. You know, he's putting this footlocker together. He's putting all this information together like he's trying to leave clues, like he's trying to say something from the grave. And so it's important who is photographed, or whose photograph is left in this footlocker. So far, we have Jack Ruby, we have Oswald, we have Tippit, all the big players, right? And then there's a picture of Oswald's mugshot, Ruby's mugshot. There's a photo. I would love to get my hands on this photo. Okay, I've not seen it, but according to these sources that I'm quoting, there was a photo inside Roscoe White's footlocker of Oswald, Tippit, and Ruby all together. And of course, the Warren Commission will go to great lengths to say Ruby and Oswald didn't know each other. Neither of them had a relationship with Tippit. This was all random. But according to this photo, not only did they all know each other, they all know Roscoe White, because Roscoe White had the picture of it. And of course, Roscoe's wife worked for Ruby, and connections in the military with Oswald go back all the way to 57. And he served in the Dallas police with J.D. Tippit. So it puts them all in a relationship together of some sort. They certainly knew each other. Then there's a photo of documents allegedly found in the wallet at the Tippit murder scene. And I remember that same wallet that later disappeared. They said and they took pictures of it. And this guy, Roscoe White, got the original negatives and included them in his footlocker. Oswald in his Marine Corps uniform, Oswald's Social Security card, one of Oswald's children, Oswald's military ID, Oswald's Fair Play for Cuba membership card. You know, if all of this was discovered at the Tippit murder scene, it makes Oswald look pretty guilty, doesn't it? You know, he mistakenly dropped his wallet. You would think this evidence is so incriminating that they would put that wallet in Fort Knox to protect it. Unless it was fabricated, it was all phony, and it would have been proven phony in a trial, then all of a sudden you got to get rid of it after you've used it to claim you know who the killer is. So it served its purpose, but it disappeared. But not from Roscoe White's footlocker. Here are some of the photos I just mentioned. There's the picture of Ruby posing with Geneva. It's kind of a creepy picture, if you ask me. Ruby's ogling her. She was not a showgirl, but you wouldn't know it by that picture because she's posing in a skimpy outfit and he's feasting his eyes on her. But anyway, that was Ricky White's mom. There's the negatives of the backyard photo. Bottom left, Oswald mugshot. Bottom middle, J.D. Tippit in his civilian clothes. Bottom right, Jack Ruby mugshot. Couple other pictures of the documents. You've got the military ID on the far left. You've got the Fair Play for Cuba committee on the bottom, and then the Social Security card top right. So these are just a few pieces of evidence that Roscoe White had in his footlocker that his son discovered in 1982, 11 years after his daddy died. And I think it's not a stretch to look at all of that and say that there's clearly a relationship here between Ruby and Roscoe. And I will corroborate that and add to that evidence as we go along. The fact that Ruby and Geneva are in the same picture, and Geneva worked for Ruby, indicates that Geneva's husband would know. Of course, Ruby, it's estimated that Ruby knew the names of over 700 Dallas police officers. He was that connected with the Dallas Police Department. If you want more information on his connections to the Dallas Police Department, I've done a couple episodes on Ruby that would fill in some of those gaps. It's clear by these pictures that Roscoe has a relationship, some relationship with Oswald. And this, of course, includes his military training and his military service that pretty much corresponds to Oswald's military service in all the same places, doing this, all the same jobs for all the same people. There's a relationship between Ruby and Oswald, clearly. If you want more information on that, I've done an episode on Ruby, a couple episodes on Ruby and his connections to Oswald. Between Roscoe and Tippit, having a picture of Tippit, and why would he even include that in his footlocker, not in his military or in his police uniform, but in civilian clothes. And of course, between Ruby and Tippit, that photo of Ruby, Tippit, and Oswald together, boy, I wish I could, like I said, I wish I could get my hands on it, but it shows that all three of these have a relationship with one another. All three are major players in the JFK assassination. Of course, Roscoe White had the photo, so he knows them as well. In other words, the photos prove, at least to me, that Ruby, Roscoe, Tippit, and Oswald all knew each other. And anecdotally, as we proceed along and you see some of the ancillary evidence and the movements of these people, the relationship becomes more and more clear. So that's what he found in the footlocker. Now, a few months after Ricky first viewed these photographs, which might have been interesting to him, might not have been, but when mysterious things start happening subsequent to you looking at these photographs, you might start to think they're more important than you realized originally, because two men broke into the White home in Paris, beat up his wife, Geneva, and took, among other things, the packet of pictures. So the pictures disappeared with this robbery. Now, the men were arrested later in Florida on a charge unrelated to this robbery, and FBI agents confiscated the pictures, sent them to Washington. They were turned over at that time. Now, this is in the mid-70s, or this was, I'm sorry, it's not the mid-70s, this is the mid-80s. They were turned over to the Senate Intelligence Committee, which at that time was investigating, especially the CIA and its relations with the within other government agencies, and it was basically conducting an investigation of the CIA and all of its relations. And this started in the mid-70s with the Church Committee. It's sort of been ongoing. This packet was eventually returned to Geneva, the mom, but in December 76, when the House Select Committee started looking into this, they showed up at Geneva's home again, and they collected the packet of pictures and the other items from the footlocker, including a rifle stock that belonged to Roscoe White. So you open this footlocker and you find these pictures, among other things, which we'll talk about. And immediately there's a robbery, and the thing that the two men broke in and took were the pictures. And then the pictures end up in Washington when those men get arrested. Then they get returned to Geneva. And then the House Select Committee comes back and gets them again. And so consequently, it's clear that the pictures mean something. The footlocker also contained a diary, and he died in 71. So this diary ran from basically covered Roscoe's daily life from the time he graduated high school until his death in September 71. And so Ricky went to the date that JFK was assassinated, 11/22/63. And I don't know if he went directly to it or if he was just thumbing through and eventually landed on it. But on the date listed as 11/22/63, this was what was written in his father's diary, in his father's handwriting. Quote, Lebanon, was on the 6th floor of the Texas Schoolbook Depository. Saul was in the records building, and Mandarin was behind the stockade fence. Shots fired from upper buildings were for diversion. Shots fired, target hit. Shots from fence, definite hit. Man on other side of fence in the way. Shots again from upper buildings, no hit. Target open, fired, definite hit. Gun retrieved by man to the side, took to rail car area. Whirled over fence, took man down to protect myself, ran around back of fence, down embankment to the car. Drove to Oak Cliff, met officer, told officer not to drive by house. Something was wrong. Forced to take out officer at 10th and Patton. That's Tippit. Backtracked to car, drove back to the area to take out other passenger. Failed to transport subject to Redbird. Realized what a mistake I had made. Back to DPD awaiting information. I've highlighted some very important confessions here by Roscoe White in this diary. The first is that Mandarin, these are code names. Lebanon, Saul, and Mandarin are all code names. He's telling where the shooters are. And Mandarin, he said, is the shooter behind the stockade fence, which is the grassy knoll. He says the shots that were fired from the buildings were for diversion purposes, which I agree with. We've talked about that before. And he said shots that were from the fence, the definite hit, or the shots that took out the president, essentially. The definite hit, target open, fired, definite hit. So what he's saying is Mandarin, the shooter behind the stockade fence, is the one who made the definite hit. Then he says, afterwards, the gun was retrieved by a man to the side, an accomplice, who then took it to the rail car area. And then he drove to Oak Cliff, where he met an officer. Something was wrong. And so he was forced to take out the officer at 10th and Patton. Of course, that's where J.D. Tippit was killed. And then he backtracked to the car, drove back to the area to take out the other passenger. I don't know what that means. Evidently, somebody else was a loose end, had to be taken out as well. Then he mentions a failure that he was supposed to transport a subject to Redbird, the airfield on the outskirts of town. He failed to do that. And he knew right away that was a mistake. He realized what a mistake he had made. Then he went back to Dallas Police Department waiting information. So it appears here he had two jobs. His first job was to shoot from, he's either Lebanon, Saul, or Mandarin. We're going to find out which of the three. You can kind of tell because I've highlighted. His job is to shoot at the target. All right. And if he was Mandarin, shooting from behind the stockade fence, then he did his job. It was a definite hit. Then his second job was to transport the subject to Redbird. He failed to do that. So he did one job, he didn't do the other. And that was a mistake. In between those two jobs, according to this confession, he went to Oak Cliff and he met up with an officer, a fellow officer, and that's when he realized there was something wrong, and he's forced to take out the officer, 10th and Patton. That's the killing of Tippit. That wasn't planned, according to Roscoe White. That was one of those things that happened in the heat of the moment, and he had to make a quick decision, a quick call. He made it, and so he did three things that day, according to his own confession. One was planned and succeeded. One was planned and failed. One was unplanned and succeeded. Now, Ricky's reading this, and of course, he is, I mean, well, how would you think if you read this about your father, and you know what happened on that day, and your father is basically confessing to the crime of the century. So he drives to his mom's house in Odessa, this is Geneva, and forced her to read this, sort of confronted her. And according to him, quote, she read for a few minutes, started crying, Ricky said. Then she told me it was all true. So this diary is going to disappear. I'm going to tell you that story here in a second. Later, just like the photos, right? So far, he's found two things in the footlocker. and they're both going to disappear. The photos are going to be stolen, returned, and then confiscated again by the House Select Committee. And the diary is going to disappear. The story of that is in the weeks that followed, Ricky told some of his story to a district attorney there in Midland, Texas. His name was Al Shorey. And he had been reading some of the other information in this footlocker, and there was a bank, obviously somewhere in the Dallas area, with a safe deposit box in it, because in that footlocker was a safe deposit box key. And so he's trying to figure out, he needs help finding this bank. There must be something important in that safe deposit box. So he goes to this district attorney, tells him the story that I just told you, shows him some of the information. And Shorey's chief investigator, J.D. Lucky, started going to Dallas looking for the bank. Couldn't find the bank, at least not initially. Ricky eventually finds it. He finds it in Oak Cliff, so it makes sense it'd be in Oak Cliff. It's a suburb of Dallas, and he finds the bank. And when he goes to the bank with the key, he finds inside the safe deposit box $200,000 to $250,000 worth of bearer bonds. He has no idea where his dad got those, how he got those. He never had a job. You know, you'll see when we go through the job history. Roscoe White was not a wealthy man and did not have a job at any point in his life that Ricky knew about that could produce that kind of money. Anyway, that's what he found in the safety deposit box. Meanwhile, the district attorney kind of got spooked by the whole thing, what he knew. So he goes to the FBI. Oh boy, considering what we know about the FBI now, that was probably the worst thing he could have done. So what's the FBI do there? The FBI begins surveilling Ricky White without his knowledge. There's surveillance logs to back this up. And in January of '88, 2 FBI agents confronted Ricky, hauled him down to FBI headquarters, along with the contents of the footlocker, to downtown Midland, and they questioned him for 5 hours. They gave him the third degree. They put him through the ringer. That's what they did. They even threatened him with jail time for withholding evidence in a federal investigation. And they copied some of the material. They made an impression of the safety deposit box key. Then they gave him back all the stuff. But later that same day, after Roscoe had returned home and he was exhausted, in fact, when he got home, his wife said he was crying. They'd put him through the ringer to such a degree. And he's just Ricky, this is Ricky. He's just the son. He's kind of a good old boy, Texas guy, owns his own business, but he's not used to dealing with these intelligence officials, these agents. And they knew the law and knew how to leverage it against him. So anyway, he comes home, he's whipped, and he wants to lay down and take a nap. And one of the agents returned to Ricky's house, and he told Geneva, who answered the door, that he was there to retrieve a notebook that he had accidentally placed in the evidence that they had returned to Ricky. And she didn't know where he'd put it. She looked around. She said, "Oh, it's in there." And she pointed into the rec room where Ricky had come in and laid all the evidence that had been returned to him on the pool table. Meanwhile, Ricky's wife, who had let the FBI agent in, trusting him, went to find Ricky. Of course, he was in his bedroom taking a nap. When they returned, or when she returned, Ricky was behind her. She saw the agent slipping out the front door, and he yelled back, "I found what I was looking for." And so they just went on about their business. A couple days later, Ricky and his sister were going through the evidence again, and Ricky discovered that the journal, the diary that had the confession, was gone. It was missing. Now, the FBI has denied categorically, take that for what it's worth, that they did not take Roscoe White's journal, but it's gone. And just like the photos, right? As soon as the authorities got involved, all that evidence disappeared. Fortunately, a lot of what we know now today is because of Ricky's attention to detail, and the fact that he and his sister, but primarily he, memorized the important excerpts in that diary and who was the subject of all those photos, and was able to reproduce it later on, even though the evidence itself was missing. In 1990, Ricky, this is a few years later, discovered that there was a paper sack in the Foot Locker that had a barely legible notation on it, some Roman numerals, and the word Paris written on it. And you remember, all my grandparents used to live in Paris, so I wonder if there's something at their old house. So he went to his grandparents' old house in Paris, and he searched, and in the attic, he found a heavy aluminum canister, which was sealed tight, up in the crawl space, basically, at the wing of the attic there. And he had to get a crowbar. When he opened the canister, he found the following items. He found his father's Marine Corps dog tags, all right? He found negatives of old family photographs. None of this is alarming. Then he found 2 laminated photographs, one of the Warren Commission handing their report to LBJ in '64, which is that famous picture there, and the other of Jack Ruby in handcuffs, pictured below. So that's what he found in the canister. Well, that's not all he found. And this next discovery is huge, especially when you put it in context with the earlier confession that was in the diary. He found a faded green scrapbook, which is an old shorthand textbook. And the front of it, as you opened it from the front, like you normally would a book, was the shorthand textbook. But if you turned it over backwards and opened it from the back, there were a bunch of blank pages, and his father had converted it into a scrapbook. And it had newspaper pictures pasted all over the pages, and all kinds of captions that had been handwritten underneath the newspaper pictures by his father, Roscoe. We'll come back to that. He also found 3 cables that were covered in protective plastic. So evidently his father thought these were so important, and age would destroy these paper cables that he wanted preserved. And so he covered them in protective plastic. They weren't laminated, they were inserted into a protective plastic kind of a case. And all 3 of these cables were orders from Naval Intelligence. You'll see here in a minute. They were all addressed to Mandarin, and they all had Roscoe White's serial number on them. So this is the connection between Mandarin and Roscoe White. Evidently, Roscoe White was, just like Lee Harvey Oswald, during the same period when Lee Harvey Oswald was recruited in the Office of Naval Intelligence under the umbrella of the CIA, so was Roscoe White, which is why they were always together as they went through their military service. And evidently, Roscoe had a code name. His code name was Mandarin. All of these cables will be addressed to Mandarin, and they will all have next to Mandarin Roscoe White's serial number, confirmation that Mandarin was Roscoe White and vice versa. So let's look at these cables. It's just phenomenal find in this canister up in his grandparents' attic. There's 3 of them. The first one was dated February 1963. This is the year of the assassination. And at the top, it identifies the sender as Navy INT, I-N-T period, which stands for intelligence. Underneath Navy intelligence was Roscoe White's military serial number, and it was addressed to Mandarin, which was his ONI code name. Here's the subject. Quote, foreign affairs assignments have been canceled. The next assignment is to eliminate a national security threat to worldwide peace. Destination will be Houston, Austin, or Dallas. Contacts are being arranged. Orders are subject to change at any time. Reply back if not understood. The cable was signed by C. Bowers of OSHA. Now, this is not the OSHA that we're familiar with today. Back then, it was the Office of Special Handling Affairs. At the bottom of the cable, and this is important, it read, quote, RE, as if to say regarding, rifle code AAA destroy, rifle. Now, at the time, when this is all coming out, we have not learned yet about the CIA program, ZR rifle, to kill there's an assassination program against a domestic threat. You remember now, it came out in the 70s that CIA had a foreign assassination program called executive action. And that's how we participate in the assassination against Lumumba and others, the 640 some attempts against Castro, et cetera, taking out foreign heads of state and using, in some cases, non-CIA personnel to do it, i.e. the mob, for example. It turns out that simultaneous to that, the CIA also had a domestic assassination program designed to take out domestic threats. And the fact that this cable refers to rifle indicates that this intelligence cable is in reference to this domestic assassination program. And you notice it says destroy. He was supposed to destroy this cable. And it's clear by the subject here that they're not talking about a foreign affairs assignment. In fact, they say they've been canceled. The next assignment for this rifle operation is to eliminate a national security threat to worldwide peace. And the destination is going to be Houston, Austin, or Dallas, which indicates that this is a domestic target. And of course, if you read the CIA, the original documents that govern the CIA, I forget the word I'm looking for, but it says it's very clear the CIA is not supposed to operate domestically. It's supposed to operate only on foreign soil. So this is why it's top secret. You got to destroy this document, because the CIA is violating its own charter by conducting an operation on domestic soil. I wanted to go through this ZR rifle thing just briefly for those of you that aren't familiar with it. I did several episodes on it, but this is just a refresher. The ZR rifle, according to the family jewels, which CIA directors Colby and I forget the second one, but they turned over some of the internal documents, the family jewels of the CIA, and this is how we learned about the ZR rifle program. It was an American program. This is a combination of the family jewels, William Harvey's own handwritten notes, who during this period of time was the CIA expert on all things related to any kind of assassination program. He was the assassination guru. And then Cuban intelligence, which I have discovered Cuban intelligence to be more honest and forthcoming about these things than the American intelligence. Anyway, ZR rifle was an American program recruiting American assets, whether they were criminals or CIA in-house assets, for quote, and this is right from the paperwork, for quote, direct personal action against an American target. This is highly scandalous here. And of course, if you look at the synchronicities of ZR rifle and who the target might be, all you got to do is look at the timing. It officially began 5 months after JFK took office, and it officially ended 5 months after JFK was assassinated. Pretty clear who ZR rifle was targeting. The primary agent, according to all the documents related to it that we have access to, was an agent known as QJ Win. They always use codes, just like Mandarin. And it has been determined by, this is where the Mary Haverstick book comes in handy, that June Cobb, pictured here, she went by several names, Jerry Cobb, June Cobb. She had an alias named June Corwin, but it was all the same person. And this is a picture. She was a pilot. She was involved in our space program. She was highly trained, and she was just a female. And this is the perfect cover for a program like this. No one will suspect a female. And she is QJ Win. She's that agent. And if you watch her movements in the lead up to the JFK assassination, where she was, and by her own admission on the day of the assassination, her movements afterwards, and of course then record of payment, all that kind of stuff, it's pretty clear QJ Win is June/Jerry Cobb. If you want to read more about that, go get Mary Haverstick's book. It lays it out in excruciating detail. According to the code, they even use codes to identify bases of operations or field of operations. Started off, the base of operation was codenamed Germany, which was really Texas, and its field of operation was Baden-Baden, which is really Dallas/Fort Worth. And some more synchronicities. ZR Rifle was headquartered in Mexico City, which is the closest CIA, non-US CIA station to Dallas, from where QJ Win could manage this whole operation. And of course, you're not going to manage a domestic operation on US soil. You're going to, in order to appear to be complying with the charter of the CIA and complying with law, you're going to do all this in a foreign country. And Mexico City was the closest CIA station to Dallas. In June of 61, June/Jerry Cobb, or QJ Win, was deployed to Mexico City. That's when ZR Rifle started, in June of 61. So that makes sense. All right, you follow that forward. And by the time we get to 1963, we're getting close to the assassination, meaning people need to be moved into place into the field of operations. So that means from Mexico City to Texas to Dallas. And sure enough, in 63, QJ Win was hired by Bell Helicopter. This is a cover job, obviously. And the ZR Rifle documents actually say that, quote, QJ Win has found cover employment in the field of operations, which is Dallas-Fort Worth. Of course, QJ Win is June/Jerry Cobb. Bell Helicopter, ironically, also served as cover jobs for Michael and Ruth Payne. And of course, Ruth Payne was Lee Harvey Oswald's handler in Dallas after George de Mohrenschildt handed him off to her. So everybody's being moved into place into the field of operations. And Ruth Payne was instrumental in getting Oswald. She is his handler, by the way, after all. She got him the job at the Texas Schoolbook Depository, moving him into place, the Patsy, where he's going to be blamed for this assassination. She also, in order to get Marina out of the way, took Marina, Oswald, and her two children in and let them live with her during the time that Oswald and Marina were separated. And Oswald moved into Dallas, Oak Cliff neighborhood, into a rooming house. So everything's being set up. As you can see, QJ Win and ZR Rifle is now moving from Mexico City to Texas to Dallas. They've moved their agent to Dallas. They got her a cover job. They got their handlers of Lee Harvey Oswald, the Patsy that they're setting up, a cover job of Bell Helicopters. Bell Helicopter is like the Riley Coffee of New Orleans, or the Texas Schoolbook Depository for Oswald. It's the cover jobs for these people, these CIA people. So Bell Helicopter is obviously tied in close to the CIA. It separates the family, right? Get the mom and the kids away from the Patsy and start getting the job right there in the motorcade, right alongside the motorcade route. And everything's being set up, and and then the assassination happens, and then boom, May 1964, 5 months later, there's a large payout to QJ Win, and the program officially ends. Mission accomplished. It's over. And so this is what we're talking about. And then, of course, his reference in his confession to how he failed to deliver the subject to Redbird Airfield. Now, on the day that JFK was assassinated, June/Jerry Cobb, QJ Win, who was a pilot, landed an airplane at Redbird Airport on November 22, 1963. By her own admission, she became friends with Mary Haverstick, and she told Mary, I was there. I was on a plane. We were waiting for a pickup. And her story was that she idled her plane on the runway for several hours, waiting. And there were Life magazine reporters aboard. While the biggest story in the century was happening in downtown Dallas, these Life magazine reporters stayed on this plane, And she stayed there at the runway, waiting for this, whoever it was that she was supposed to pick up. And the question has always been, well, who was she supposed to pick up? And Mary Haverstick tried and tried and tried to get that out of QJ Wynn or June/Jerry Cobb, whatever you want to call her, and she would never say. But now we have this ancillary evidence out of this Foot Locker from Roscoe White that it was his job. After he did the shooting, he was supposed to take somebody to Redbird Airfield, and he failed to do so. And we know that that's true because June/Jerry Cobb or QJ Wynn had to take off eventually, that airplane, without getting whoever was supposed to meet there, never arrived, never showed up. So she left without that person, or without that, whatever. It was a subject, so it had to be a person. So the subject never arrived. And now we know it was Roscoe's job to take that subject there, never did. Now, Mary has speculated that QJ Wynn doesn't want to say who she was supposed to pick up or what actually happened. And Mary says it's kind of inconceivable to her, unbelievable that she'd just sit on the plane for all that time. So she has speculated that QJ Wynn actually went to Dealey Plaza and was the babushka lady wearing the handkerchief over her head and either used a camera that was turned into a gun or was there to record everything that happened on film, whatever. I don't tend to think that. I think QJ Wynn was exactly what she says she was. She was a pilot. She was waiting there to pick up somebody, something important, somebody important to this whole operation, and that somebody never arrived. And now we know why that somebody never arrived, because Roscoe White never got around to taking that person to Redbird Airfield. And that's in his own words and in her own words. She was there at Redbird Airfield waiting for somebody. He was supposed to take somebody to Redbird Airfield and failed to do so. And it was a mistake. He said so right in the next sentence. He realized later that he had made a big mistake. Whoever was supposed to be on that plane flying out of Dallas with QJ Wynn was important, and him not arriving there or not was a big mistake. It's a loose end. That's something that's going to have to be dealt with later. So that is some corroboration. You put the Roscoe White story together with the June/Jerry Cobb QJ Wynn story together that Mary Haverstick has told us, and all of a sudden pieces start falling into place. You start saying, okay, now I know why she was there at the airport. All right, that was all the subject of the first cable. The second cable was in September of '63, 2 months before the assassination. Remember, this all came out of that canister that he found in his grandparents' attic. It had the same heading as the February cable, but the subject was different. It said, quote, Dallas destination has been chosen. You remember in the original cable, they were trying to decide between Houston, Austin, or Dallas. They've chosen Dallas. And it says, your place hidden within the department. Contacts are within this letter. Continue on as planned. I want to focus on the second sentence, your place hidden within the department, because what happens next? Another cover job. In October of '63, the next month, Roscoe White gets hired by Dallas Police Department. Your place hidden within the department. In other words, your background or who you really are as a CIA operative working for the ZR rifle program is hidden. They don't know. They're hiring you, and there's no even trail. There's no paper trail, because White's application with the city of Dallas was never in his personnel file. It was like he didn't exist, but he was hired in by Dallas police, and he worked there for 6 weeks before the assassination. But his place was hidden within the department. It's pretty easy to do when you can control the paperwork. Later, when people go back to try to retrace his movements following the paper trail, and there is no paper trail, that's how you hide people within a department. This is coincidentally, or not, the exact same time almost the same day that Lee Harvey Oswald went to work at the Texas Schoolbook Depository. So here you are, if you're the CIA and this is your program, this is your operation domestically to kill the president under ZR rifle, you've now placed all these people in cover jobs. You got Ruth and Mary and Michael Payne working at Bell Helicopter. You got QJ Wynn working at Bell Helicopter. Now you've got your Patsy working at Texas Schoolbook Depository, right on the route where the motorcade's going to go. You got your shooter working within the Dallas Police Department, which means he's going to have a uniform, which means on the day of the assassination, he can pretty much go anywhere he wants. No one's going to suspect anything. By the way, the same footnote in the February cable as in the September cable as the February. They both had the same RE rifle footnote at the bottom. So, and the same a person who authored it, the same guy, and it came from the same Navy intelligence. All right, so everything is the same heading, same footing. The only thing that changed was the subject. They've now chosen Dallas. Everybody's got their cover jobs. And then we have the third cable in December. Now the assassination has happened. The heading is the same. Again, the footnote is the same. The subject changes. It says, quote, stay within the department, Dallas Police. Witnesses have eyes, ears, and mouths. You know what to do of the mix-up. The mix-up was the shooting of J.D. Tippit. That wasn't part of the plan. Something went wrong, and according to his confession, Mandarin, who is Roscoe, he had to take action because he realized J.D. Tippit knew something, and he's not part of the operation. So he took him out. That's the mix-up. And according to this cable, quote, the men will be in to cover all the misleading evidence soon. Stay as planned, wait for further orders. Don't worry about the mix-up. We got people coming, are going to fix that up for us. You just stay there, lay low, keep your eyes open, watch for the witnesses. Watch for the witnesses because they have eyes, ears, and worst of all for us, they have mouths. And in a minute, you'll see what they do with these witnesses. All right. These are really important cables that he has discovered in this box up in the attic of his grandparents' house in Paris. And along with these cables, he finds this faded green scrapbook. It's a shorthand textbook. I mentioned it earlier, and it's got these in the back. It's got these pasted in newspaper stories or pictures. And I told you I'd come back to it. So here I am. So he turns the book around backwards and he opens it up. And the headline pasted picture is of a newspaper article which says, the moment the world stood still, November 22, 1963. So instantly, Ricky knows that this subject of the scrapbook is going to be the JFK assassination. It's awful coincidental. Everything his daddy left was about the JFK assassination. The footlocker, the confession, all the photos, JFK assassination. Now he finds this box, and in this box, he's got these three cables. They're all about the year leading up to the assassination. Now he finds the scrapbook. It's about the moment the world stood still, the JFK assassination. And above the headline, Roscoe Wright had written in his own handwriting, quote, from Bay of Pigs to DL, which means Dallas, to New Orleans, to NO, New Orleans. And what he's saying here, researchers believe, is that Bay of Pigs is the root cause of what happened in Dallas. And New Orleans is where a lot of the plot percolated and was put into place. I've said so for years. Dallas is not inconsequential. It matters, obviously, but the most important city or location in all of this pre-planning of the JFK assassination happened in New Orleans. And it all stems back to what they believe JFK's failure was at the Bay of Pigs. And this is Roscoe White writing this. He's the intelligence officer. He's Mandarin, who's going to end up being the shooter on the grassy knoll behind the stockade fence. He's the one writing this. Page 4, Roscoe writes in his own handwriting, quote, now got the head, going tail later. This is a clear reference to Carlos Marcello's quote, A dog will continue to bite you if you cut off its tail, but if you cut off its head, the tail ceases to be a problem. And so here is Roscoe White literally quoting Marcello. Of course, Marcello was talking about JFK and Bobby Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy was a pain in all the mafiosos' rear end. He was harassing him. He had literally deported Marcello down to Guatemala with no money, no clothes, no nothing. And they wanted Bobby dead for his double cross of supposed to be taking care of the mafia, the Kennedys. Instead, they're going after the mafia. They wanted Bobby dead, but they realized if you kill Bobby, yes, you still got to deal with the president of the United States. But if you kill the president, Bobby ceases to be a problem. And this is what he's quoting here in this page 4 of his little scrapbook. In page 9, there's 2 pictures. There's the top picture is of Doris Duke with her husband Porfirio Rubirosa Ariza, who just coincidentally happened to be until his death in June of '63, he happened to be an assassin for Rafael Trujillo, the leader of the Dominican Republic. I believe it was Dominican, either that or Puerto Rico. I think it was Dominican Republic. Anyway, this guy, her husband, had died in June of '63 while meeting with the Chicago crime boss, Sam Giancana. He died mysteriously. Healthy guy. I think it was either a car wreck. I think it was a car wreck. And it was a very suspicious death. Anyway, he was meeting with Sam Giancana. And this picture is of Doris Duke. That would be a fascinating line of inquiry to study Doris Duke and her connections. But obviously, Roscoe White sees a connection here. And below the picture, he writes a caption, "Cover up starts now." On page 15, there's a picture of Jack Ruby as he is approaching Oswald and shooting him. And the white caption underneath it says, quote, "Setup job. Ruby was brave." Now remember, this is his friend Ruby. All these people, Oswald he knows, Ruby he knows, Tippit he knew, and he had to kill his own friend, right? So this is all very incestuous here. Page 17 is a very famous picture of Dallas police hoisting up the Oswald rifle, walking along for the press to see. And White writes a caption underneath that photo, says 7.65 Mauser, our gun, ZR rifle, CIA, our gun used to kill President Kennedy, November 22, 1963. Of course, now what they're holding up is a Mannlicher Carcano that they say was the Oswald rifle. And Roscoe saying, no, it was our gun that killed him. And if you remember back, and I did an episode on this, the very first gun they found in the Texas Schoolbook Depository, on the evidence reports, both officers said it was a 7.65 Mauser. And they changed it after they visited Oswald's garage to a Mannlicher Carcano. Page 20, in this faded green scrapbook, Roscoe had pasted in a newspaper print of Mary Mormon's picture, the famous Mary Mormon photograph as she's looking out at the motorcade towards the grassy knoll. He wrote a caption, "Mandarin kills K." Well, we already know who Mandarin is. That's Roscoe. He's admitting it. And again, he already admitted it once in his confession. Now he's admitting it again in the scrapbook. Mandarin kills K. We all know who K is. Uses 7.65 Mauser in assassination. And in the same Mary Mormon photograph, he's put in the top left-hand corner a red X and a dot. It's actually a box, a red box. And inside that box, he's got a dot marking the spot where he took the fatal shot. He's admitting that he did it. He's admitting that that gun that they're holding up is not the gun. We used a 7.65 Mauser. And he's admitting that this is where I stood. Now, Ed Hoffman, the deaf mute, and Lee Bowers both tell of them seeing 2 men behind the fence in that exact same location. And after the shot was taken, the one guy hands the rifle to the other guy breaks it down, disappears into the rail yard, and the other guy walks away in the opposite direction. This story corroborates, or what he's written here both in his confession and also here in this scrapbook, completely corroborates what Ed Hoffman said, what Lee Bowers said. It's corroborated. Two men. And if you go back to his confession, he says after he took the shot, the definite hit, he handed the gun to his Confederate. He broke it down. He disappeared into the rail car and he went somewhere. He went somewhere else. So this story is ringing true. It's got corroboration. And then on the back cover of this scrapbook, he wrote, quote, 28 people died from witness program. The rest of the people later. This goes to what he was told in the last cable. If you remember, people talk. People have eyes. Witnesses have eyes. They have ears, and they talk. And this is Roscoe saying that the program did not just cover that day's events, killing of the president, killing of the J.D. Tippit, etc., but it extends past that to anybody who might talk. At the time he wrote this, he says 28 people had already been killed that were witnesses. The rest of the people will come later. Now you wonder, I was thinking about this the other day. All the people who had foreknowledge of this assassination, what happened to them. I can just give you a few names off the top of my head here just quickly. Rose Cheramy, the prostitute who predicted in a hospital bed that JFK was going to be shot. What happened to her? She died. How about David Ferry, who knew in advance what was going to happen to JFK? What happened to him? He died. Lee Oswald, who told Judith Ferry, told other people, tried to stop it with a letter to the FBI, stopped a previous assassination attempt on November 2 in Chicago, FBI informant. Right? What happened to him? He died. Geneva White, we're going to talk about her in a minute and what she knew and what's going to happen to her. How about Richard K. Snagel? I could go on and on, all these witnesses who, this is part of this program to eliminate the witnesses. And he says so in his own handwriting, that at the time we've killed 28 witnesses, there will be more. There's entire books devoted to all these mysterious deaths. Nothing mysterious about it. It's part of the program. If a witness becomes a problem, according to Roscoe White, they die. These witnesses die. And so I mentioned Geneva White, so let's talk about her recollection of this period. Her story is that she actually found out about this in advance because she overheard her husband talking with Jack Ruby, plotting to kill the president. And when Ruby caught her, she was at the Carousel Club. She worked there, and she was walking by, and she heard a name that jogged her memory that had personal relevance to her. So she stopped when she heard that name. I'll tell that story in just a minute. And she listened, and inside was her husband, and he was talking to Ruby, and they were talking about killing the president. And Ruby caught her, and he was so furious about it, he threatened to kill her two children, Tony and Ricky. And at this point, Roscoe, who they nicknamed Rock, or she called him Rock, interceded on her behalf and said, well, we don't need to kill her. We won't kill her. Going back in my mind to that picture where Jack Ruby is ogling Roscoe White's wife. He's looking her up and down. Geneva, she's his employee. She's not a showgirl, but he's treating her like one. Any man who will allow his wife to be subject to that kind of, treatment or whatever, makes you wonder about that man. I wouldn't want my wife having to go through that. I don't care who's her employer is, who her employer is, but anyway, excuse me. In this case, Rock interceded on her behalf to a degree. He suggested an alternative is what he did. We don't need to kill her. Okay. But we'll just put her through some shock treatments and that'll obliterate her memory. And so, yes, indeed, if you follow forward, you find out that in 1964, Geneva was forced to go through 4 separate sets of shock therapy. And these didn't all happen in 64. That was the beginning of it. In 75, 4 years after her husband was killed in a mysterious explosion, she went through her final shock treatment. So, and other bad things, all of these shock treatments sort of open the door to some other psychological problems that Geneva White was going to have going forward. It's like they just broke her brain and realize, that's all they have to do, because then you're discredited. If you come out and say anything, then everybody thinks you're just crazy. So, but anyway, according to her memory, this is how she found out in advance what their plan was. And she says that there was something fishy about her husband and his relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald. And she says that she had recalled being introduced to Lee Oswald a few months before at a rifle range near the Grand Prairie Naval Air Station. And there, White and Oswald went together to practice marksmanship. So one time they were there, and she showed up, and Rock introduced her to Lee Harvey Oswald. A few weeks later, she remembered his face. She saw Oswald in a grocery store in Oak Cliff. When she got home, she told her husband, "Hey, I saw your friend Lee today." And she said that Rock got real irritated with her and told her, "Don't ever mention that name again." So she remembered that. That was kind of odd. And this is the period during which she caught Rock in bed with a woman named Hazel, and it almost broke up their marriage. Rock won her back, promised the affair was over. But on that night when she was at work and she walked by Jack Ruby's office, the reason she stopped and eavesdropped was because she heard Ruby say Hazel's name. And so it caught her attention. She knew her husband was in there, so she knew they're in there talking about Hazel. And, any wife hears that name of somebody her husband just cheated with, it's probably going to arouse some suspicion, or at least interest, curiosity. So she stops and she listens in and she eavesdrops, and she hears Ruby tell her husband, quote, "Hazel is the contact." So Ruby says something about the Bay of Pigs and how Kennedy had betrayed them. And the longer she listened, she said the clearer it became to her that her husband and Ruby were talking about killing the president. And this is the conversation that Ruby, this is why Ruby wanted to kill her. When he found out that she knew this information, she's a loose end. But they agree to put her through these shock treatments instead. So Geneva tells the story the night before the assassination. So she knows what her husband's up to, and her husband knows that she knows, and Ruby knows that she knows. She says, quote, "Neither of us slept very well the night before the assassination. He kept tossing and turning. Finally, I asked him how he could go through it. He said, quote, 'Honey, it's like war. The president is a national security threat. If I don't do it, we'll be in a nuclear war very soon.' And she responded, 'But he's got 2 children. And just like you do.' And she said, Rock replied, quote, 'Honey, matters were taken out of our hands a long time ago.' Then he turned over and pretended to be sleeping, and I started to cry. The next morning, she said, Rock looked like a whipped dog when he went to work that morning. He didn't touch his breakfast. I was bathing the kids when I heard on the TV that Kennedy had been shot. Then they said that a policeman had also been shot, and I thought, oh God, it's Rock. But then he came home around 7, just like always. I put the kids to bed about 9. I made a pot of coffee. We sat in the kitchen. We talked for a long time. And he said, quote, 'Honey, I never dreamed it would come to this.'" So this is somebody who had foreknowledge. Then she tells another story about that Saturday night. So Friday was the day of the shooting, right? And Sunday was Ricky's 3rd birthday. So life goes on. So on Saturday, she said, I baked a coconut cake and got the party favors ready. That night, their friend, Ruby, came over for supper. That's who they celebrated the night before the birthday. We sent the kids outside to play with Ruby's dog. She couldn't remember the dog's name. It was Sheba or something like that. Rock, according to Geneva, cooked steaks on the grill. She said, I made baked potatoes and a salad and a strawberry shortcake because that was Rock's favorite. He said, after dinner, I was washing the dishes. I could hear him talking in the living room. Ruby was bragging about killing Kennedy. I said, it's already happened. Flying high like he was drunk, only he wasn't drinking. Now he's talking about killing Oswald the next day and said it wasn't going to be any problem because he'd get a signal when they were ready to move him. He said something about how one of them had left a bullet at Parkland. Okay, we've all discussed the bullet on the stretcher, the immaculate bullet that had no damage to it. They call it magic bullet. Now, Ricky White, the son, says when he remembers that weekend, he says after Ruby was killed the following day on Sunday, his father ran into the house and instructed everyone to pack up, we're leaving. And the family then disappeared for several days. He doesn't remember all the circumstances. He just remembers that it happened. Yeah, he was 3 years old at that time. In the 6 years that followed, Rock White made a number of unexplained trips to New Orleans and other places. According to Geneva, she said, quote, I was never sure what was happening, but I was raised to let the man do the thinking and not ask any questions. In 1968, White moved his family to Arkansas and said he worked for the post office. There's no records. Remember now that the people he works for are good at hiding him within these departments. So there's no records. And the employment records that they do have don't even go back that far. Later, they returned to Dallas, and Roscoe became the assistant manager of a 5 and dime store, like a Dollar General or something. So he's not making very much money. During that period of time, Roscoe and his wife Geneva start getting counseled by a pastor named Reverend Jack Shaw, pictured here on the slide. And it had to do with their marriage. They were having marital problems because Roscoe couldn't stop cheating on her. And Reverend Jack Shaw said that Roscoe was a very compliant therapy recipient. He didn't fight it. He didn't resist it. In fact, in his view, he was trying. And he was like an open book. He told the Reverend Shaw a lot of things and asked to recall things about the White family. Reverend Shaw said, quote, the family appeared to have money. Now, remember now, he hadn't had any good jobs. Dallas police, he only worked 6 weeks. And then he bounced around when he was moving his family around to Arkansas, back and forth to Dallas and New Orleans and other places. Worked in a 5 and dime store, post office. But according to Reverend Shaw, they had money. He was their pastor at Central Park Baptist Church. They had a new car. They had a new home. He said, Roscoe even pledged $10,000 to our building program. His sons, Ricky and Tony, had new bikes. They both had go-karts. And the family purchased a cabin on a lake in Central Texas. And so that's odd. How were they coming into all this money, considering the fact that Geneva during this period did not have a job, and Roscoe was between jobs half the time, and the other jobs that he did, and times he did have jobs, they weren't good paying jobs. Meanwhile, according to Reverend Jack Shaw, this was the reason they were meeting together. Roscoe kept meeting or messing around with other women. And so he would pray with them and counsel them. And he said Roscoe poured his heart out to me. He told me he had sinned against God, had sinned against his country, and especially against his wife. He told me he had taken human life on foreign soil and here at home. I knew he had been in the service and been a policeman. I didn't press him for details. So this is the aftermath, the 6 years after the assassination. Now we get to the summer of 71. Geneva had gone recently to New Orleans, and after she got back from something that happened in New Orleans that triggered her. When she got back from New Orleans to Dallas, she suffered an emotional breakdown and ended up being hospitalized for almost a month. Reverend Shaw would go up and meet with her, hold her hand, and he found out through her, she told him the story about how some guy, what she said, a strange and sinister man, had approached her while she was in New Orleans and reminded her about Roscoe's part in the Kennedy assassination. Remember now what your husband did. He told her, quote, we have another job for Rock. Tell him he has 48 hours to get in touch. And according to her, what she knew, apparently he never got in touch. Well, you don't turn, once you're in ONI, you're always in ONI, or the CIA, either one. And you don't turn from being an asset to a liability without there being some consequences involved. Roscoe had undergone a conversion experience during this period where he had become a born-again Christian. He was trying to turn his life around. Of course, that wasn't easy because he'd gotten used to palling around with Jack Ruby and that nightclub world, and that's how he met all these women he couldn't say no to. He cheated on her constantly. But Reverend Shaw and his, I think, honest desire, his good faith desire to stay married to his wife had an impact on him. So he's trying to do right. He told Geneva and Reverend Shaw several times that he wanted, quote, out of this business, but that it meant signing his own death warrant if he did. Well, this is all about the time that she'd gone to New Orleans, come back, had the nervous breakdown. And they had communicated to her he had 48 hours to respond to his next job. Well, evidently, he didn't respond, or they found out that he was trying to get out of this business. Because Roscoe, who had a better paying job at M&M Equipment by this point, this is September of 71, was involved in a fatal accident at work. A acetylene torch flamed up, and that was his regular job. That wasn't unusual, but there was a leak in it. And the leak ignited a can of chemicals, which was stored under his workbench, exploded and burned over 90% of his body. When Reverend Shaw showed up at the hospital to pray with him, it's basically on his deathbed, he told Roscoe White, according to Reverend Shaw, told him that he saw who did it. It wasn't an accident. He saw who did it, but that he forgave him. And then he died. But right before he died, Reverend Shaw said again, I have murdered people, foreign and domestic. Just like unburdening himself constantly. Shaw assumed at that point there'd be a criminal investigation because the explosion was very suspicious, and who he knew Roscoe White to be. He just figured this is somebody pretty important. He's done some things. There's going to be an investigation, but it wasn't. Nothing happened. It just all went away. So that's the story. The Roscoe White story, and how, it's kind of interesting. I was talking with a fellow this morning, and we were noting how important 1971 was, because it's the same year Malcolm Wallace, seemingly in broad daylight on a nice sunny day with no issues around, no rain, no weather, nothing, had his car accident. He ended up dead as a result of a car accident. And later, when they tested the body, he had carbon monoxide in his system. Interesting. That happened. And remember, Malcolm Wallace was LBJ's hitman. It was his fingerprint they found in the sniper's nest at the Texas Schoolbook Depository. According to Billy Celestis, Cliff Carter, Malcolm Wallace was involved in the assassination. So in the same year, at almost the same time, two of the people that were, according to witnesses and or confessions, involved in the assassination, both were taken out by the conspirators the same year. Tragically, suspiciously. Malcolm Wallace and Roscoe White, both in Texas. Interesting. This is not a story that comes to us just because Ricky White found something in his daddy's footlocker, and then he eventually found a canister in his grandparents' attic, and he just ran out and made it public. There are other witnesses that can, as the story comes out, corroborate parts of the Roscoe White story. For example, Geneva, his wife, testified that Roscoe left the house in the morning. He was wearing civilian clothes, but he was carrying his uniform on a hanger. And that's going to mean something here in a minute. Bobby Hargis, the Dallas Police Department motorcycle cop who was riding behind the motorcade to the left, got sprayed with the brains and blood, etc., etc. Parked his bike, you can see him on the film, ran across Elm Street, up the grassy knoll, and behind the picket fence, because he was looking in that direction when the shooting happened, and in his mind, that's where the fatal shot came from. When he got behind the picket fence, he encountered, quote, Roscoe White. That's his own words. And he knew Roscoe White because they're both in Dallas Police together. And he was in his Dallas Police Department uniform. That was a question that was asked him because, of course, when he left for work that morning, he was wearing his civilian clothes. But when Bobby Hargis saw him, he was in his uniform. Of course, Geneva said he was carrying his uniform with him when he left. And according to Bobby Hargis, when he confronted Roscoe White, White says, quote, I'm looking for the shooter like everybody else. And of course, Hargis took that as gospel, turned around and ran back to his bike. But of course, now you put that together with the other context that we now know. And here is a witness, two witnesses so far, one that he had his uniform with him, and the other that he was behind the grassy knoll in that uniform. And a third witness, Beverly Oliver, said she saw Geneva's husband. That's how she called him. She didn't call him Roscoe. She said, I saw Geneva's husband without a hat and a gun belt walking down the steps from the picket fence. He came out behind the picket fence. Now, Beverly knew Geneva, Roscoe's wife, because she worked across the street from the Carousel Club where Geneva worked. She worked at the Colony Club. I don't know if it was across the street, but it was close. And they used to go back and forth and visit with each other. They knew each other. And because she knew Geneva, she knew Roscoe. And so she identified that was Roscoe. Of course, he was wearing his uniform. She said that. And he came down walking from behind the picket fence, not anything suspicious to her. He's a Dallas police officer, which tells you why they needed a guy inside the Dallas police, because, boy, you wear a uniform, you got a badge, you can pretty much go anywhere and not arouse any sort of suspicion. I mean, when Bobby Hargis, a Dallas police officer, confronts you and sees the badge and the uniform and he walks away, no one else is going to be suspicious. And then, of course, I've already noted that the Ed Hoffman and Lee Bauer stories corroborate Roscoe's movements and his confession, how he gave the gun to a second guy who took off in one direction, he took off in the other direction. So here we have Roscoe White, who's confessed in writing at least 4 times that we know of. Once in the confession in the diary, which of course disappeared when the FBI stole it. He said Mandarin was behind the stockade fence. The target was open and fired. It was a definite hit. Mandarin did it. And of course, then we find out from the 3 cables who Mandarin was. Mandarin was always next to Roscoe White's military serial ID number. He was Mandarin. So Mandarin was behind the stockade fence. He's the guy who hit the target. It was a definite hit. He said he used our gun, a 7.65 Mauser, and it was used, he specified President Kennedy. So in conclusion, Mandarin kills K and used our gun, a 7.65 Mauser, to do it. And then just to add more context to it, more corroboration, he includes a red box with a black dot on the Mary Mormon photograph that says where he stood. And that is the exact place Lee Bauer said he saw the 2 men. That is the exact place Ed Hoffman said he saw the 2 men. So, I mean, even myself, I've been studying this for 26 years, and I've gone through different dispensations of who I believe or I've heard when I studied watched the men who killed Kennedy and studied the French assassin Lucien Sarti, and of course E. Howard Hunt in his deathbed confession indicated that the assassin behind the picket fence was Lucien Sarti. Now Lucien Sarti never said that. These are 2 witnesses. The one witness is Christian David, who was interviewed by the men who killed Kennedy in the Nigel Turner series in 1988, and then E. Howard Hunt in his deathbed confession in 2004. So that's a pretty strong, compelling case that the French assassin Lucien Sarti was the grassy knoll shooter, according to 2 witnesses. Then James Files comes along in 1994 and says he did it. And I've talked in previous episodes about how believable James Files is. He is believable. He has a lot of knowledge about other people that were there, where they were located, what his expertise was, down to the fact that he bit a bullet and it fell into the ground. Somebody found it years later. I mean, it's a confession, but it's not witnesses. It's just a confession. So here, so far, you have two men, one who was accused of being the assassin by two witnesses, another who confessed to being the assassin. Then you have Malcolm Mac Wallace, the LBJ hitman, and according to Billy Celestis and LBJ attorney Cliff Carter, they said it was Malcolm Wallace who fired from the grassy knoll. I always had my doubts about the grassy knoll location because it was fingerprint they found in the sniper's nest in the Texas Schoolbook Depository, which indicated to me that's where he was. But anyway, Billy Celestis and Cliff Carr said, no, he was in the grassy knoll. So we have three people who claim to be the shooter on the grassy knoll. And they're either accused by witnesses or they've confessed. But no one can say, other than Roscoe White, that they have confessions and witnesses, right? Roscoe White confessed 4 times that he was Mandarin and he took the shots. And he used the German Mauser to do it, 7.65, and where he was standing behind the fence, who he gave the rifle to. Those stories are corroborated by Hoffman and Bowers. And then there's 3 witnesses that say, well, he had his uniform that morning. Well, he was behind the picket fence. I confronted him. He was in his uniform. He was behind the picket fence. The other, Beverly Oliver, said, well, he was behind the picket fence. He was walking down the steps after I saw him. So we have a written confession in a diary. We have 3 written confessions in his shorthand scrapbook. We have 2 corroborating witnesses who personally saw him, a uniformed White, behind the picket fence on the grassy knoll after the shooting, right? With Geneva's testimony that he left that morning with his uniform on a hanger. And that's the story that went public in 1990 and has continued to this day. I have to say that the first few times I looked at this story, I was skeptical myself, but this book that has been recently put out in 2024 by Shaw and his co-writer is pretty compelling. It's pretty compelling, and anyone interested in the story needs to, that's probably the definitive work on that, on the Roscoe White story. There may be others, but that's the most current for sure. And there's also YouTube videos you can follow along that they tell the story in that as well. So that's the story of Roscoe White, whom I believe now is the assassin of JFK, and because of a problem when he met up with his friend across town at Oak Cliff, Officer J.D. Tippit, he realized Tippit knew more than he should. He had to take him out as well. And so, it helps explain why, if you're an assassin and you've committed all these different assassinations, and you know that you've done a lot of jobs for the organization for whom you work, because they approach your wife and say, we have another job for him. So he's done other jobs besides just the JFK. And he's got $200,000 or $250,000 in bearer bonds and a safety deposit box. So this guy's been earning money doing these jobs for the ONI or CIA, and one of those jobs included JFK. You wouldn't feel like a guy like that who does it for a living would be so guilty or racked with guilt that he constantly make confessions to the Reverend Jack Shaw. But perhaps it was him having to kill one of his friends, detective or the Dallas police officer, J.D. Tippit, that just tore him up, and he just could not leave it alone. He was always confessing to Reverend Jack Shaw about killing all these people, and he expected at some point, he predicted it. If I get out of this business, I'm signing my own death warrant. And he was actually almost, it comes across that he's almost relieved when he's on his deathbed. He tells Reverend Jack Shaw, this wasn't an accident. I saw who did it, but I forgive him. Almost like I had it coming. And so I think when you look at the evidence and the witness statements and the movements and everything that was found by his family after his death, and what he said, what he wrote, what other people said, what they saw, you start taking all that and the money that they found. You put all that together, you start realizing this guy was a hired gun. He was placed into the Dallas Police Department for a purpose, right before the assassination, just like Lee Harvey Oswald was placed at the Texas Schoolbook Depository to serve out his purpose, just like Ruth and Michael Payne were placed at Bell Helicopter to carry out their purpose, just like QJ Wynn of ZR Rifle was placed at Bell Helicopter, just like QJ Wynn was at Redbird Airfield, and he was supposed to deliver something to the Redbird Airfield, and he didn't. All of this evidence is overwhelming. It's overwhelming. I think this story helps us understand what happened on November 22nd, 1963. It was a hit by the CIA and its ZR Rifle program, a domestic assassination program against a domestic target. And any witnesses were afterwards who might see things, hear things, or say things were, according to that cable number 3, were going to be taken out, taken care of. And at the time of the writing, Roscoe White said 28 witnesses had already died mysteriously, and more still to come. I think it's pretty simple. I think this makes it pretty simple. As for this has happened to me many times, and as a JFK researcher, you have to be open-minded. You can't get so invested in one particular theory that you won't listen to new evidence. This is new evidence. All right, to me, it's new evidence to me. At one time, I fully believed Lucien Sartee was the assassin, but then more evidence came out. And then I thought it was James Files. I've never believed it was Malcolm Wallace. Malcolm Wallace never claimed it. Billy Saul Estes and Cliff Carter did, but the fact that they found his fingerprint in the Texas Schoolbook Depository tells me, Sniper's Nest tells me, that he was one of those diversionary shots. He was used in the assassination, but he's not the one who fired the fatal shot. But I think I was wrong about Lucien Sartee. I think I was wrong about James Files, possibly. I still don't know what to do with the James Files information. But I am currently under the I am currently convinced that Roscoe White was the actual killer and had to kill his friend J.D. Tippit when he discovered that J.D. Tippit was on to what was going on. And he was the only one in this whole operation with whom he was involved that wasn't CIA. And he was a loose end. They had to take him out. Okay, that is today's episode. I hope you enjoyed that. Feel free to check out my website, www.sphistory.com. If you have anybody that you know of that needs homeschool materials or maybe needs a homeschool teacher, I'm available. Also, if you're interested in a micro course, click the micro course tab on the website, follow the directions, email me a topic and a date, and we'll set that up. Until next time, God bless.